Quiet, you.
That young man is Landon, correct?
What is your name, young man? Landon. There we go. What is your name, young man? Huh? Landon, last name? Drisson. There we go.
Thank you.
We gotta know. We may have more than one Landon show up in the next little while.
That's true. That's true. That's true. It's possible. All righty. Last week, if you were here, what did Saul do? He went and took counsel with whom? Some of you, your text will say witches. Mine says a necromancer. I like that terminology. Of Endor, not as we discussed a lot since you've seen Star Wars. It's not the planet of the Wookiees or of the the little small things that couldn't fight. Anyhow, not that city, not that town. All right. So Saul went and he consulted with a witch, a sorceress. And who did he ask for? Samuel. Why? Because the Lord refused to talk or answer Saul in deeds or in actions or in dreams. We're going to see here, in the last few chapters here, are setting up the death of Saul and David's role or non-role in this. And so what you had in 28 is the Philistines had come out and arrayed for battle. The Israelites have responded. Remember what someone requested of David? Anybody remember that? Achish, the king of Gath, asked David to be his bodyguard and go with him out to fight the Jews or the Hebrews. And so now we pick up in 29. This is pretty straightforward prose, and so it's pretty straightforward material. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces as epic, and the Israelites were encamped in the spring that is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines were passing by on hundreds and thousands, and David and his men were passing on the rear with Achish. And the commanders of the Philistines says, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, Is not David the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he has deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said, Send that man back, that he may return to the place which you have assigned him. He shall not go with us in the battle. And we'll stop right there. So David is Achish's bodyguard. He and how many of his men? Yeah, brother. I'm in 1 Samuel chapter 29. Sorry about that. 1 Samuel 29. How many men does David have at this time? Starts with a 6 and has 2 zeros in it. He has 600 men. That's a sizable force. It's a sizable number of bodyguards. By the way, going back 2 chapters to 27, was David honest with Achish about his military exploits? Not a bit. David was killing and destroying entire towns. When he raided a town, he killed everyone in the town. And then told Achish the king, I was raiding down in the Negev. I was raiding down in this area. But he was killing and wiping out towns near and close to Jerusalem. Why? Because of the fact that one day he will be king and have to fight these individuals himself. And so he's eliminating for himself these future enemies. So Achish doesn't know this, but the heads of the Philistine, other 5 commanders, or the larger number of commanders, are starting to look and say, hey, do you see a problem with having 600 men, well-armed, well-skilled in battle, because David is a mercenary, his men are guns for hire, behind you with his countrymen in front of you? You see kind of a military faux pas waiting to happen? Everyone sees this as a problem. Take a look and see what they say. Lest in battle, he becomes adversary for us. How can this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would not it be with our head, or the heads of these men here? Is David not of whom they sing one and another dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The fear is that David, in the heat of the battle, as a protector to the kings of both Gath and the rest of them there, turns sides and begins to slaughter the Philistines from the rear position. And in so doing, reconcile himself with Saul with the heads of the Philistines. Let me ask you a question. Could David, if he killed all the kings of the Philistines, reconcile himself back to Saul? It's not possible. Why? Because the issue is the fact that David is killing Philistines at a rate that Saul's not. And Saul began to get jealous. And Saul then began to seek after David, because Saul's rage against David is one of a jealous rage. And now Saul, what did the witch of Endor tell Saul? That in the middle of battle, what's going to happen to Saul? We'll have to place that again next week. Anyhow, this Saul is going to be killed. He and his entire family. Thank you. So Saul is going to be killed. So all this is prepping, but not, you read this, it's over a matter of just a very short period of time. David is in the other camp. Saul's going to visit the witch of Endor. Saul's being told that he's going to die in this battle. David doesn't know that Saul's going to be killed in this battle. Here's another thing, too. Providentially, behind the scenes, you have the Lord working it to where David and Saul cannot meet on the battlefield. Correct? I mean, think about it. David and Saul were to find themselves locked on the battlefield, and David kills Saul as an activation of the Philistines. Would David be able to rise to the throne now? Be a lot harder. He was a traitor. He sided with the Philistines. He killed the king of Israel. He went to ascend the throne, and he only did so with Philistine help, and the Philistines could believe that they have an end with this man. Because Achish believes this, right? Achish has said in another passage, this guy is going to be my puppet because he is in the house with Saul, and he is my man. I'll be back in 27. We're going to see where God providentially works it toward David leaves the battlefield. And it's necessary because next week we're going to see why it's important for David not to be on the battlefield. Because usually what happens when a country goes to war and they commit all their resources to fight one foe and there's other foes to your south. What usually happens when the foes to your south realize that there's no men back home? Raiding party. So David providentially sends the Philistines 600 men back into their rear guard as more of a rearguard action, whether they know it or not. This David may turn on us, kill us all, and reconcile himself with Saul with our heads. Now, has David already taken the head of a Philistine lord? Took out his sling, smacked a dude in between the eye, and then as the man was laid dying, or depending on how you want to read the text, he whips up the sword and cuts off his head. If he was alive when he got smacked in the head with a stone, he wasn't when his head came off his shoulders. This imagery is fresh in the mind of the Philistines. The song, Saul has killed his thousands, David kills his tens of thousands. They equate these two as being allies, but this song is what made them enemies. Now check this out. Look at this here. Then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out with him. Has David been honest with Achish? No. The reason why he killed everybody in the town he went to was so Achish would not find out that he was actually raiding closer to home instead of further away. So David has been playing on both sides of the fence here. But in Achish's eyes, he's been an honest, straight shooter. And according to what David has demonstrated to him, he's been an honest, straight shooter. For I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming, from now until this day. Nevertheless, the Lord did not approve, so go back now. Go peaceably, that it may not displease, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. So I want you to go back. I want you to go back to the land, to the town that I gave you. I want you to go back to where you're supposed to be, and don't be angry with us. Now, what was prudence on the Lord of the Philistines is actually something that you have where you see, and as you begin to look at this whole story, God working in and amongst the actions of individuals. Again, we talked about one of the scenarios. You have, if David and Saul find each other on the battlefield and get into a pitched battle, because who would push that engagement, David or Saul? Based on what we have leading up to this point, who would push that engagement upon the battlefield, David or Saul? Saul would. Would Saul let David go? No, Saul would believe that he would be in the right manner to kill David, because David is now a what? He is a traitor. He is a turncoat. And again, we make the point that if David kills Saul, David's ascension to the throne is difficult. It's not uncommon. You go back and you look at how, especially in the Roman Empire, how emperors ascended and descended the thrones and utilized the Praetorian Guard to make that happen. You wonder how it became a state and empire for as long as it did. We think we have political problems today. Go read some of the history of how emperors came and went in the nation, in the Empire of Rome. Now go back. And David said to Achish, "What have I done? What have I found? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish answered to David and said, "I know that you are as blameless in my sight as the angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us in battle." Have you ever had a moment in your life where life was clicking along pretty good? You've had some bad things coming along, but then life was clicking along, and you have an opportunity to go out and prove yourself and demonstrate your success and your ability in this ability, and then someone goes, "No, you can't go." "But I want to go." You can't go. And one of the things that happens when this happens is usually people get sullen and down in the mouth. If David goes, David's going to have a hard time ascending the throne if he engages Saul. Here's we see next week, if David doesn't go, his family will be carried off and sold off into slavery. Oh man, I gave away next week's sermon. Y'all won't be here next week now. Oh well, that was not in there. It's not in there. Do not read chapter 30. I'm kidding. You're sitting there, you've got your life seems to be clipping along, you've had some setbacks. David definitely has some setbacks. He now has an opportunity to go out and again prove himself in battle against the king of Israel and be a bodyguard with Achish. He's not going to be a forward front soldier, and now all of a sudden he's been told, you can't go. A bit of a setback. But in his not going, David is going to be sitting outside of his tent one day and watch an individual who is bringing the crown, the bracelets, and the ring of the king to David, who isn't on the battlefield, who can ascend the throne with righteous hands. See, what happens is we look at the minor setback that's in front of us and go, I don't understand why I can't have what I want right now. Because I don't want you to have what you want right now. We have experienced, and we experience setbacks left all the time in our life, and a lot of times instead of looking and seeing what God and praying what God has for us in the future, we get trapped up and caught up in the aspect of, well, I want it, and I want it now. We live in an instantaneous now society. I know people that hate waiting the 3 minutes for popcorn. Many of you older than me remember the time when it was over the fire. I'm kidding. The little glass thing with the oil. Right, Miss Van? That's right. I remember the pot with the glass thing that was so hot that it burnt your hands. You dare not put it in your lap. You'd end up scalding you to death. But you made popcorn with a little bit of oil, and then you've heard this montage of mine. Then you had the hot air popper that seemed to shoot it all over your kitchen for some reason. Right? I mean, now that's a fun, you want to have a fun weapon, you take that bowl away and you aim that dude. Anyhow, we live in an instantaneous now culture. We want an instantaneous response from God. And sometimes, a lot of times, God's response is, yeah, that's cute, you want that now. I got it. The answer is still wait or no. But you don't understand. No. You don't understand. And this is the issue when you get over into, I believe it's 2 Peter, when Peter is talking about God is not slow, as some count slowness. The early church was expecting Christ to return momentarily. And he hadn't returned. And Peter writes and goes, he's not asleep. He's not slow. He's not dim-witted. He's not taking his time just to take his time. He is doing things methodically according to his plan. Now, while we would want him to return instantaneously, it may be another millennium, because for him a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. Be involved in what you need to be involved in. David is mad that he cannot go out into battle, but what David is going to find out in next chapter, not that he's going to find out next chapter, but we're going to find out next chapter, that if David goes into battle, his family is taken from him. And he'll never see him again. But since he's not on the battlefield, he then gets to pursue and gets his wife back. If David is on the battlefield and kills the king of Israel, his ascent to the throne will be one plagued with filthy hands. And up to this point, David has said, I will not what? About the Lord's anointed. I will not put my hand out against the Lord's anointed. But on a battlefield, do you get to make the luxury of those decisions? Not really. Notice how, while all this is interplaying, how God is working in the background. Saul doesn't get a message from the Lord, so he has the witch summon Samuel, and Samuel say, hey, why have you bothered me? Oh, here, I'll tell you what. Just as I told you way back in chapter 15, he didn't really say way back in chapter 15, I'm giving you where it is. Way back in chapter 15, that your kingdom will be taken and given to another man. Not only is that going to happen, but tomorrow you and your sons will be killed on the battlefield. See how all this is working in the background to bring about David as king. Because right now, where is David? He's sent home from the Philistine army. He certainly is not king, and he certainly is not welcome in his own homeland. And if he were to set foot in his own homeland, he'd be killed or have Saul continue to pursue him, as Saul has continued to do all the way up to chapter 27. For David, this has to be an aggravating course of action, because why would I be anointed king? How long has he lived in the land of the Philistines? Does anyone know? 1 year and 4 months. He's lived in the land of the Philistines for 1 year and 4 months. A lot of times we have a hard time waiting for the next week. I sent off my concealed carry permit information. It said 6 weeks. We are now in week 8, and I tell you, the temptation to send off a nasty gram going, hey, it's been 8 weeks. But then I remember that it's a government, and the government never moves fast for anyone at all. Unless you owe them money, and then they move quick. Why? Because I want it. It's been 8 weeks. Whew, man. I hope you don't have to wait much longer. I know, I can just can't hear. It'll probably show up while I'm gone on vacation. That's usually how it works. I spent 1 year and 4 months in another man's kingdom, being a mercenary to another king, while I am yet the anointed king of Israel. This isn't how I would do it, God. Have you ever had that conversation with the Lord? This ain't how I'd be doing it. I find those cute conversations even when I have them, because then I look back and go, oh yes, like when I listen to my daughter say, Daddy, that's not how to do things. Yeah, those are sweet little girls, aren't they? They are. But then I look at them and go, yeah, but you're 7. And Daddy's 45. And we're going to do it this way because, well, I'm Dad. And I've lived a little longer than you, and your plan, while it sounds good in your head, is filled with problems. Why can't I go out on the battlefield? Because the Philistine kings don't want you out there. And that's true. And the Philistine kings have a right to be worried about David, because from a tactical situation, you don't put 600 men, heavily armed, that are the enemy behind you and hoping to have success on the battlefield. That's a great way to have a loss. Providentially, through the hands of God, God moves him off the battlefield to where you don't have this capability. Providentially, you have Saul being told, tomorrow you're going to be killed at the hands of your enemies. Here's another thing. David's men, did they have any compunction about killing Saul? Not a bit. The first time in the cave, they're like, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him. You're a fool. You're a coward if you don't kill him. You're a coward if you don't kill him. They didn't really say that, but I've hung around with enough soldiers. You hear that. You want to get a soldier to do something, you never go, you're a coward if you don't do this. And you sit back, and off he'll go. So, you're a coward if you don't kill this guy. Then he takes one of his other men into the camp, and the guy goes, hey, look, I know you can't kill him, but I can take that dude's spear and pin his head to the ground, and no one will know. So even if David doesn't encounter this man on the battlefield, one of his 600 could. And could David ascend the throne if one of his 600 did it? No. They come to the battlefield, they have to be removed from the battlefield. When you see God's hand working behind it all to make it happen. David is allowed to leave and not go into battle to where it doesn't look weak or to where he doesn't look like he's supporting the kings, because the Philistine king sent him off the battlefield, not David refusing to fight. But yet if you were to look at David, what have I done? Have I not been honest with you? Well, David, I wouldn't exactly play the honest card because you're killing people in nearby villages and you're kind of lying to them, but they don't know you're lying to them. But that's okay. I wouldn't play the honesty card there because we know you haven't been honest. We get that same problem. I want what I want and I want it now. Why can't I go out with you? Why can't I do this? Because I have a better plan for you. The way I have you ascending the throne is going to be much better than if you actually go out there and ascend the throne that way. Secondly, you're going to be needed, whether you realize it or not, in the rear for something other than that. And then when Saul is killed, you take the position of king without any taint being assigned to your name. See, we get wrapped up in the why can't I have, instead of looking forward to what God is going to providentially do in our lives. Because here's the thing, He already knows what's going to occur in your life. He's the beginning and the end, not the beginning and will eventually be the end. The phraseology is the beginning and the end. He knows the beginning and He knows the end. He knows the details in between. His position doesn't change. His knowledge doesn't change. We have to put our faith in the fact that while He has a plan and is directing our path, He is directing it the way that is best. The way that is best for Him. And quit going, oh, this is not how I would do it. He knows that's not how you would do it. Because you've told Him. Lord knows I've told Him. I'm sure y'all have told Him. Not for me or not for David, but for your own life. I wouldn't do it this way. I got that memo. But I'm doing it this way. Because this is the best way. Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who have come with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning, and they returned to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So the Philistines, as David leaves early in the morning, the imagery is the Philistines are walking out into battle to fight Saul. Questions? I'll throw my glasses on in case you have questions. Nothing from you, Mrs. Van? No. How about Delight? Have you seen those Star Wars yet? No? Okay. Yeah. That wasn't a question, that was a retort. Yes.
So the way the story plays out, it's got this narrow escape back and forth just in time. It really reads like a novel, or you go and say that novels are written to read like this. What are your thoughts about Providence working out at that level of complexity today?
Let me rephrase it, see if I can get your question right. As you see God's hand working in this story, very much with things in the nick of time, in our day, does God work His providence at the same level and same tier? Yes, I think He does. There have been times, numerous times when I could have easily been sucked into a machine that had grabbed a hold of me, been speared by a piece of metal that fell off a truck that would have cut me in half. The pad that we lived on on Delta, the week we move off of it takes 7 full rounds, and we had just moved all of our soldiers off. Matter of fact, the last soldiers left that day, ripped all the tents apart. I don't look at those things as just mere coincidence, but the hand of God, the hand of providence, actually making those things work out properly. And the reason being is either God is sovereign and providential and where he is able to direct the paths of his people, or he's just a better tea leaf reader than I am. And I prefer that God be an all-knowing, all-powerful God than a better tea leaf reader than I am. So I think at times when we look at situations and we ascribe to the word luck, chance, and man, that was very fortunate. That none of that was any of those things, but the hand of God actively working, or at least working to bring about that result. There I think are times multiple paths by which God can obtain that providential plan to occur, and he allows us to select one of those paths, and he directs us along that way to end up exactly where he's always wanted us to be. And so I think that you can make an argument for that, but you cannot, I don't think, negate the hand of providence. Otherwise, you end up with a God who's not in control. And yet, as we saw back, I believe it was in Philippians, he says he is the sustainer and creator of all things. That means all things. So, questions? Other questions? Okay. Well, it was fairly straightforward prose. I mean, there's not a lot that you can go from there. By me reading it, you knew all as much as I do. I mean, there's no secret mystery here. Let's close out with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Again, we thank you for the opportunity to come together to see how this story resolves. How this antagonistic relationship between Saul towards David ends up righting itself or completing itself. As we've seen since the very beginning, how you've had godly men following after you, and you've had wicked men who have been perverting or trying to thwart your work, but yet constantly you raise up a godly man. Constantly you have shielded the godly man. Constantly you have led the godly man to where you want him to be. And constantly those who have stood in your way, Hophni and Phinehas, Eli, and now we will see Saul, you have put to death. How your hand of providence, how your sovereign will works in these situations to bring about a resolution that while we're in the midst of the problems we have, we can't see how they will ever resolve. But you know. And for us then to put our trust in the knowledge that you know. And our faith in the fact that as a knowing and all-knowing God, that you know the beginning from the end. And we put our hope in the fact that you have a right result for us that glorifies your name. We thank you for your blessing of this day, and we ask for your watch over us as we leave here. And we thank you for all these things in your name we pray. Amen. All right.